Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Martin Looney's always making our community and our state tick. He's a state senator from New Haven, President Pro Tem of the State Senate, and most importantly, the first guest ever on WNHH FM more than 10 years ago on this very program. Martin, it's always is that too much?
No, it's not hearing too well.
Oh, okay. Let me turn them up a little bit. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back, Martin Looney. Thanks for coming on air.
Great to be with you, Paul, and always happy to be here. I was, you said I was the original guest, and always happy to be invited back.
Well, you're coming at a pretty eventful time. It's interesting that we just had a special session in the state Senate where some pretty big deal issues were tackled, from housing to how we're going to afford to make up federal budget cuts. Martin, before we got to the special session, I wanted to ask you something that was just reported in passing that you said the other day that really interested us here at The Independent. You said that if in the next couple months Congress allows the Obamacare, the ACA, subsidies to lapse, and a lot of people are going to lose Obamacare, that we should consider in Connecticut setting up our own public option. I didn't see much else about that. That was a comment you made in passing at a press conference. I was just wondering what's in the works. What's the thinking?
Yes, Paul. I think that if we are going to lose those subsidies, which would be critical for people, might see their premiums increase by 3 or 4-fold overall with the loss of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, with the expansion of Medicaid that happened. I think we have to look at a public option or look at some of the things that we were grappling with before those subsidies came into place. We had a bill back in 2021, which was Senate Bill 842 of that session, which I think might be a model for going forward. It will allow small businesses and nonprofits to participate in the state employees' health plan and achieve great savings and costs for that. There would also be a mechanism for providing for individual coverages as well. I think that would be the model to begin with to look at. And I think it becomes even more urgent if we're in a position where the subsidies are either lost altogether or substantially reduced, so that people are going to be facing a huge increase.
Now, the first set of subsidy questions on the table, if I have it right, Marty, please correct me if I don't, is, as you said, during the pandemic, they expanded Obamacare subsidies. So a lot more people got Obamacare and they got more money than they had before, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing being taken off the table, to bring it back to pre-2021 levels, correct?
Yes, and that's the threat. What I find interesting is that at the end of the shutdown, the Republicans said that they would give the Democrats a vote on their bill, but they said by December. And I would think what that would mean, that the Republicans might not want to be exposed to a sort of naked vote on that subject unless they've already had a chance to propose something of their own, because their members would be at risk if you're voting absolute no on something and people are going to lose all that
right
coverage.
They're very worried, especially in red states, about
exactly
a lot of their voters who are going to lose their coverage.
Exactly right. So I think what they're likely to do is come up with some plan of their own that they will pass, and then say, well, the Democratic plan is superseded by what we've already done. The Democratic plan doesn't have the votes anyway. But the concern also is whether or not the Senate would be able to get, the Republican Senate, whether they would be able to get their plan passed in the House, which is it seems to be more
more
hardcore.
What's disturbing to me about the Senate plan, U.S. Senate plan, is that they want to turn it to individual health plans, people's individual accounts. They basically want to gamble our money with crypto in the stock market for people's health benefits, correct?
Yes.
Which feels like another kind of scam, right? I don't know if you see it the same way. But what's also interesting about the discussion, Marty, see if you disagree, because we've talked about healthcare so much over the years. This often happens with Trump. He makes a statement to start a conversation, and it's stuff that people of us who don't agree with Trump think he has a really good point in critiquing. So I think Trump was 100% right to say the problem with Obamacare is that it makes too much money for the insurance companies. Now, where you go with that, he wants to go to make a lot of money in the financial sector and rip people off by gambling with their health care with these individual accounts. But when they first passed Obamacare, people on the left, like people like me who supported Bernie Sanders, felt that what was wrong with Obamacare is that it was Romney care, that it was bringing in the private sector too much, that has a business model based on denying you as much health care for as much money they can get from you in premiums in the first place, and that we called it a public option under Obama, but we're really talking about single payer, where government had a larger pool of people and we cut out insurance companies. Would you agree that Trump is trying to appeal to the average person by correctly identifying the greed of insurance companies, but then introducing a plan Republicans can embrace that, in fact, take away more health insurance from people in the long run?
Well, that's my worry, because he has identified a real problem, which is just the absolute rapacious conduct of the insurance companies over the years. And you're right, that was, I think, the flaw in Obamacare, that the consideration for a public option failed as part of Obamacare.
And you remember Joe Lieberman killed that because he was for it, and when they called it Medicare for All.
Yes.
But he was mad about the Lamont primary when he saw that all the Lamont people for it, because everyone agrees Obamacare is too expensive. And at the time, I remember we hated that he was taking a Republican private sector approach to it. But in the end, 40 million people were no longer uninsured. And you kind of felt that in the real world, like if Marty Looney had done that in Connecticut, we would have said, Marty, way to go. You didn't get your plan you originally wanted in the ideal version, but you got 40 million people off health care.
Absolutely.
Got them insured.
That's right. That's right.
But now I think Trump is right that it just gets too expensive because of the insurance company's role.
Oh, it is. The insurance company's role just makes the whole thing unsupportable, and just the profit margins are extreme. I think that the insurance companies, just like the private equity companies, when they want to buy healthcare facilities, we see what a complete disaster it was with Prospect owning the hospitals in Connecticut and then just siphoning as much profit out of them as they could. I mean, all of those guys, both the insurance companies and the private equity companies, they ought to all be wearing tri-cornered hats and have parrots on their shoulders. That's really what they are.
So you're back where you were saying, let's rethink healthcare and what direction you want to take it in. So you'd like to see Connecticut consider a public option, if I understood it correctly before, you were saying by starting out by letting nonprofits and small business and individuals buy into the state healthcare program, which is basically like a Medicare for all type model.
That's right. No? Yes. Yeah, and I think that bill that we were working on in 2021 would be the starting point for it. And of course, in Connecticut, it's probably more difficult to do this than it is in most other states, despite the fact we're generally a progressive Democratic state, because of the power of the insurance lobby here, which is
I wonder about that, Marty. So it's been an article of faith in years of my lifetime that the insurance companies, Aetna, they're all based here, Travelers, they're so powerful. But haven't they gotten rid of most of the employees they have here relatively since those years have progressed?
I think they don't have as many here as they used to. I mean, they're still.
Are we still really the insurance capital?
I think Iowa has a lot of insurance businesses. There are a couple of others that do. We probably, if we're in the lead, we're not in as far in the lead as we used to be in terms of.
But when you're
legislating
presence in the Capitol and you're being daily besieged by lobbyists, do the insurance lobbies still have the kind of clout they used to have?
They are very, very powerful. They have a number of legislators who see their health, the insurance industry's health, as being pivotal to the state of Connecticut and very important in their district. So most legislators, I would say, in Greater Hartford are legislators. The insurance companies really have their ear.
And then, so if you had more people buying into the state health plan as an option, who administers that plan? Does the private insurance company still make money administering those plans? Do they still have incentives to deny people, or does it work well?
Well, I think we'd have to work on that. Obviously, the administrative end of it, there'd have to be some limits on that. We also have to make sure that we have very high levels of premiums being actually put into service and care, and limit the profit margins per policy.
And Mark, do you have a ballpark, not an exact number, of how many people in Connecticut are going to be affected if the subsidy extensions are expired?
I think it's 45 to 50,000.
And do they actually lose their health insurance, or does it just the prices go up and they might not be able to afford it anymore?
I think what it is that the prices become unaffordable. Because I've heard of some cases where people could see an increase of their premium of tripling or quadrupling, and some people might be paying, at the $30,000 or $40,000 a year.
Wow.
And who can afford that?
My company pays that for older people with families. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And remember a program called MeHIP, Municipal Employees Health Insurance Program. Is that still in existence? Does that overlap with that?
I'm not sure how that still coordinates with
okay.
that. Yeah.
So you're looking at a public option.
Yes.
Are you ever looking at single payer, or is that just the way to sort of gradually get there?
Ultimately, I would love to get the single payer because that was the big problem after World War II, when the victorious democracies in World War II, most of them adopted national health insurance after World War II, with the exception of the United States, and President Truman tried for that and failed, wasn't able to do it. So
I guess what I thought was ironic about that chapter in history, do you remember who killed it? It was General Motors.
yes,
And General Motors, 60 years later, filed for bankruptcy saying health care cost. But they said it was un-American at the time to have government supporting health care. Now, of course, they say that in Britain, and there are different kinds of, as you know, national health care. Britain, France, Canada, they're not run the same way.
right,
People like us who are always for single payer, for me, it's like a religious tenet, right? We look at Canada and we say, yes, sometimes they come here for certain operations you have to wait a long time for. But in surveys, they always say they would never give it up where they have in America where you can't afford to see a doctor.
exactly.
But there are critiques that the federal government didn't always run it efficiently. And I guess the response would be when insurance companies are more efficient, what they're more efficient at is making sure you don't get the health care.
Right. And there's, at least in those systems of single-payer systems around the world, at least you have the safety net that you are never going to be left without care altogether or facing bankruptcy because of the cost of your care.
And then Vermont tried single payer, and then they gave it up because it wasn't a large enough pool.
Yep.
So one argument is that you kind of have to do what you're suggesting today, which is to gradually expand a public pool. That in Vermont, when they found, if I understood correctly, that if you try just in one state rather than 50 states, you don't have enough people. And that could be a problem for public option too, right?
Yes.
Is that you're only getting the people who need it. You don't have a big enough pool of people who support each other by
That's right.
making the economics work.
And I think, that was that choice in healthcare was one of the problems. Obviously, the Republicans took control of Congress in the 46 election, and 47 and 48 they did this. Also, that the Taft-Hartley bill, I think, has been in many ways very bad for the country because it weakened the strength of labor unions. Truman vetoed that bill, but some Democrats joined with Republicans in overriding that veto. That has meant that organized labor has had less legal support from the government than it's had in other countries, and I think that's been bad for us too over the years.
Okay, we're talking to Martin Looney, who's the state Senate President Pro Tem, New Haven State Senator, has been in elected office in New Haven since the 80s.
Well, yep.
75 if you count ward committees, right?
Yeah, 75 if you count the first campaign I was involved in when Frank Logue was running for mayor and I was running for alderman, right? Yeah.
And you were still in law school, right?
I hadn't even started law school yet. I didn't go to law school until I was after I was elected to the House.
And then you taught the class,
Yeah, so I've been, I was first elected to the House in 1980, so sworn in January of 81. So Representative Mary Mashinsky of Wallingford, who started at the same time, she and I are the longest serving.
How's she doing? I haven't seen her in a while.
Well, yeah, she's doing well too. Yes, yeah.
So Governor Lamont said he wants to look at a Connecticut option. It doesn't sound like it's necessarily the same thing. He wants to create a network of health providers centered around UConn. Do you know what he's talking about, how that dovetails with the Senate bill you want to build on for expanding the public option?
I haven't seen any details of his plan yet, although UConn obviously is in a major expansion mode with the taking over Waterbury Hospital and ultimately Bristol and Day Kimball as well. Which I think is a good thing because what we have seen, it's a complete disaster when you have private equity, as what happened with Prospect with the 3 hospitals they owned and that they just suck the resources out of. The one challenge for us now, if all those hospitals go back under nonprofit ownership, they will then be, those towns will be eligible for pilot for those hospitals, which they weren't eligible for when they were owned by a
That's
so
interesting because one of your most interesting maneuvers, I thought, over the past few years, not maneuver in a bad way, was you built support for increasing pilot by having not just the poorest cities, but smaller communities benefit as well from increasing reimbursement for pilot. Will that change that?
No, it just means I think we'll have to put more money into pilot, but we'll still want to keep the 3-tiered formula of the neediest towns getting the highest level of reimbursement, then the second tier, then the third tier. And the reason we were able to pass that when we did back in 21, what it meant for New Haven was basically an increase from about $45 million a year in pilot to about $95 million. But it also drew in all the other towns, as you said, and we also included in that an increase in the state property pilot as well as the college and hospital pilot, because almost every town has at least some state property if they don't have private colleges.
Like we have Gateway College. Yeah.
Right. So we built a broad-based coalition for that. And what we did was we made sure that the lowest threshold under the new bill gave people slightly more than they were getting under the existing bill. So every town gained, but some gained more, like New Haven gained the most, but everyone gained something.
I was noticing, because they said Aaron Stewart's running for mayor, that New Britain, half their budget comes from the state.
Yeah, that may be. New Britain is a very poor town. New Britain is also a town that has very low net grand list per capita. In fact, we've done some studies of that. Right now, that's where you sometimes see the real contrast in Connecticut. The net grand list per capita in Greenwich is now over $1 million.
Wow.
And in New Britain and Wyndham and Hartford it's about 80,000.
What is it here?
New Haven is about 125.
Even though more than half our property is tax exempt.
But yeah, it was the grand list per capita. Yeah, so but still, New Haven is in a better place than those other towns are, even with the amount of tax exempt.
I wonder how she's going to run for governor, arguing the state has broken things when the state kept her in business.
Yeah, that's right. The thing is, too, is that you often see statistics that say that, well, the Republicans always say that, taxes are high in Connecticut, but they never dig below the surface and realize that the only taxes that are high in Connecticut are the local property taxes. And they're high because we don't raise enough revenue at the state level through our income tax to provide true property tax relief. So if you look at it, you see that somebody in Connecticut who owns, let's say Greenwich for an example. So the people who own mansions in Greenwich, because they're so wealthy, apart from that, even though they may be paying what looks like in absolute dollars a lot of property tax, it's actually a much lower percentage of their income than a middle-class person in New Haven is paying. And it's also a much lower percentage of the value of the home that a person in New Haven is paying. So I did a study recently that showed somebody in New Haven who has a house that's worth, say, $875,000. It would be a nice house in Westville or a nice house in East Rock. That assessed value is about $620, and because New Haven's mill rate is 38, they're paying about $24,000 a year in property taxes. In Greenwich, to be paying $24,000 a year in property taxes, your house would have to be worth $3 million and assessed at 2.1 because their mill rate is slightly under 12. So again, that person paying $24,000 in Greenwich, obviously that $24,000 is a much smaller percentage of the value of the $3 million house. And it's also probably a much smaller percentage of the income and wealth of the owner of that house because he can afford a $3 million house in the first place. So that's where the real inequity comes in. And also with the sales tax, because even though wealthy people pay more in absolute dollars in sales tax because they have the resources to do more, still, for those who are really at the highest of the high end, no matter how much they spend, it's usually a smaller percentage of their income than what middle income people spend on the sales tax.
Listen to that. We're really getting in the weeds here. So you were there in 1991 when
the income
tax. And yep. Greenwich, he got Greenwich on board for an income tax. Was it by was it by cutting the capital gains tax?
Yes. What happened was Bill Nickerson, who was the senator from Greenwich at the time, they ought to have a statue of him on the town green in Greenwich. He said the Democrats in the state Senate, I was in the House at the time, we had the votes to pass a more progressive income tax, but the Senate Democrats were one vote short until Nickerson stepped forward and said, I'll support an income tax, but it has to be drawn to my specifications, which is a flat rate of 4.5%. At that time, we had a separate tax on...
rather than a progressive income tax.
Right. So with dividends, interest, and capital gains were at a much higher rate. So for most of his constituents, who the bulk of their taxes were paid in that category, they got a substantial tax break.
Well, he's the one also negotiated cutting the capital gains tax?
Yes, because all the tax rates came down to 4.5%.
Oh, all the taxes, not just income.
Right. Well,
income went up to that. Yeah.
Right. What we did, we had a partial income tax at that point. We had a tax on dividends, interest, and capital gains, but not on earned income. So we established a 4.5% tax on earned income, and all the other taxes came down to that level.
So what have we done since?
What we've done since for the last 34 years, what I've been involved in, and many of my colleagues, is a gradual struggle to raise the progressivity of the income tax, which we've done, because we now have several different tiers. The top tier at 6.99%, and those people actually pay that rate from $1 of taxable income. But then most people pay a blended rate. And the last thing we did a couple of years ago was we really made it more progressive.
Oh, so the 6.99 is no longer marginal. It's not after $500,000 for a single or $1 million for a family.
Not for those people. They pay the 6.99.
Oh, okay.
But for almost everybody else in the lower ranges, they're paying a blended rate. So like you pay 2% on a certain amount of income and 4% on the next year, and then above that. So everybody else. So we have built in a lot of progressivity into the income tax. What we have not done yet is the fact we don't go above 6.99. So that somebody who's making $1 million a year pays the same percentage of their income tax as somebody making $10 million or $50 million or $100 million.
So you want to go up to 7.5, right?
I'd like to go to
Massachusetts.
Right. I'd like to do it in Massachusetts, then go maybe a percent to maybe 7.99. Actually, we made progress this past session, but we created, the Finance Committee voted out of committee a separate 1% tax on capital gains, but only for people in the highest tier of income. And that alone, going from 6.99 to 7.9 on that category of income, would have raised $285 million just by itself.
But the governor's never going to allow you to do this, right?
Well, I hope he will at some point, or then that's going to be part of our negotiation as we go forward. But I mean, he always says we need more taxpayers, not more taxes. But the inequity is so great, we're going to keep advocating.
I wonder if he wins a third term, can he then stop worrying so much about re-election and more about like what's right? Or maybe he just in his heart believes as someone from Greenwich that you don't punish success, as he puts it.
Well, the thing is, I don't think it is punishing success because
I agree. I mean, that's the phrase they use.
The amount of money they have after paying taxes is still so phenomenal.
Right.
That's so it's
right.
not
the Office of Legislative Research said it's like 3 times as much of your percentage of income goes toward taxes if you're like a bus driver than if you're a wealthy person in Greenwich.
That's right, because you're paying a relatively higher property tax, spending more on the sales tax, and just seeing much more come out of your income as a percentage of your income. Yeah.
Martin Looney, State Senator Martin Looney of New Haven is the Senate Pro Tem president. So you just had a special session in the legislature. You got a lot of work done.
Yes.
You passed the bill. It was 27-8 in the Senate. It was very surprising to me that this bill, and this wasn't everything you did, but this bill got Republicans and Democrats voting for it. And right, am I correct?
You mean creating the fund?
You had a fund of $500 million from reserves, because we're either maxed on reserves or maxed on the rainy day fund.
That's right.
And we're going to put upon $500 million for if there are federal cuts that affect human services like healthcare, food, and heat. Right.
That's right. That's right. And what we did in that, we didn't set aside separate pots with certain amounts of money.
It's up to the governor, right?
Except to the governor, his discretion. But if the legislative leadership disagrees with the plan that he puts forward, it can be rejected by a 4-2 vote of the 6 legislative leaders. So that's similar to what we did during COVID when he had the emergency authority to do various things.
And did you like what he did during COVID?
Yes.
Did you feel a need to override? You think?
No, I think he handled things very well during COVID. It's one of the reasons he was so popular, I think, when he came up for re-election in 22. So we had a good cooperative working relationship there. But what this will do, and one of the things the Republicans asked us on the floor, which was kind of absurd given the performance of Trump, they said, well, why don't we allocate specific amounts for specific purposes in this bill rather than creating what they call the slush fund? And they said this just a few days after the Trump administration had changed its position on SNAP 4 times in a given weekend.
Wow.
First they said, we're not going to fund it at all. And secondly, they said, well, we'll fund it at 65%. Then the federal courts in Boston and in Rhode Island said, no, they have to be fully funded. Then they said, we'll comply with the court order. Then they said, no, we're going to appeal the court order. And then they said, we're going to do a clawback on states that have gone ahead and actually provided the funding. So those were positions they took between Friday and Monday. So then how could they say to us, oh, you got to put in a particular amount? We don't know what the next thunderbolt that's going to be thrown at us will be. In fact,
how did you come up with $500 million?
Well, that was an objective number, we thought, because we knew that one of the arguments that might be made was that if you do that, are you going to destabilize some of the covenants that we entered into in 2017 as part of that budget that we passed when we
had a bipartisan agreement?
And we had a bipartisan
agreement
on that.
You're not going to spend a certain amount above a certain percentage of our revenues every year.
That's right. And there were representations made to the bondholders and all that at the time. So we consulted closely with Eric Russell, our state treasurer, on that, and he said that he would be comfortable defending a $500 million number as a reasonable number that would not create anxiety.
And that's what a rainy day is, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not coming out of the rainy day.
So the governor at first wasn't comfortable with the $500 million, but we got him up to that level. So we're happy with that fund. But now, for instance, yesterday we just heard that the federal government is talking about severe cuts in federal funding for supportive housing, and if that happens, that could become another priority item for backfilling funding, in addition to filling in for the Affordable Care Act cut. So. It's all very volatile. So some of the Republicans say, oh, we don't need the fund anymore because SNAP is going to be funded. But there's a whole lot else out there that's threatened, not just SNAP.
SNAP stuff really caught people's attention, obviously, all over the country.
It
was kind of cruel.
360,000 people in Connecticut, 10% of our population.
Why was Connecticut so much behind Virginia that has a Republican governor? He said, we're doing this because of the Democrats in Congress shutting down the government. But even before the cuts took effect, he had a plan for 100% reimbursement for the month, whereas you guys had to fight the governor from your own party so much to get that money in place.
Well, I think we ultimately got the governor to a good place on that. His first reaction was just to fund food banks and to do more there. But then I think he realized that wasn't going to be an adequate response and went ahead to look at doing much more.
But why do you think that we were behind Virginia on that?
I don't know. I don't know what the internal politics of Virginia were, and I thought that maybe the governor there just thought he could, potentially outflank the Democrats on it. Yeah.
Another measure in this bill you just passed in this emergency session is that it banned. This one was actually on party lines. You're banning courthouse arrests by ICE of immigrants if they don't have a warrant.
Yes.
And you're saying they can't wear masks on courthouse grounds unless medically necessary. What is this going to mean on the ground? Have they already shifted here? Because we noticed that they've been making arrests on the green across from the courthouse when people leave. Or actually, they had one actually on the property, but not in the courthouse. We had a picture last week when they were by the hot dog stand.
Well, I think it is. It's important to protect people who have to come to the courthouse for their own cases, or sometimes they are witnesses. In other cases, they are also coming there about housing cases, eviction cases, not only criminal cases. But I think we need to try to not have people afraid to come to court. And the other concern also about the masks is that it just seems to me outrageous that the ICE agents are wearing masks at all, because all the other federal law enforcement agencies, whether it be the FBI, the DEA, other federal agencies, they don't wear masks. They don't wear masks in the performance of their duties. They have, they're identifiable and all that. I mean, does it mean that the ICE agents are really ashamed of what they're doing?
Or feel more of a license to do misconduct?
Or feel more of a license to do misconduct. Absolutely right.
I mean, that's the thing I'm always worried about. They won't be held accountable by anyone.
That's right. So they can't be identified. That's right. I mean, that's one of the things that I know our police in New Haven pride themselves on, of course, is the being identified, having the body cameras, having the
Right.
dashboard cameras in the car to make sure everybody's held accountable, and none of that exists with ICE.
What about now? There are limits to how much state laws can limit federal activity. So
there is.
You definitely are motivated by that to protect people so they come to court, because we feel like we have a less safe city if people feel they can't come to court for whatever reasons.
That's right.
If they still can't stop federal agents, what they do on the sidewalk, is that going to help people feel more comfortable there? Or is it just saying that within our own zones, we're going to have more humane policy?
I think that to the extent that we can control it within the zones that we control, that we have to be on record for more humane policies. The Attorney General said that he probably expects the federal government to challenge this law, but he's certainly happy to defend it, he said.
All right. We're talking to State Senator Martin Looney. So we had a special session in Hartford where you passed a lot of legislation. And one thing you passed that was very controversial was a bill to promote affordable housing. You passed a version of this bill earlier in the year, and then the governor vetoed it, which very much upset the Democratic base because, according to internal emails, the governor felt there wasn't really a legitimate opposition that other people were raising based on the facts, but he's concerned about running for re-election, so he vetoed it. You passed a bill that still promotes affordable housing. It asks towns to create plans for affordable housing, and you are allowing off-street parking minimums not to prevent people from building medium-sized apartment buildings, like up to 16 units. You're expanding fair rent commissions. Do you feel it's a positive step forward? Do you feel it was watered down too much? How did you feel about the version of what you were able to pass and get the governor to support?
I think ultimately it was a very strong bill and a significant step forward. And one of the pieces of evidence for that is just how adamantly opposed the Republicans were to this bill. If it were a really watered down bill, they wouldn't have argued against it so vigorously and vociferously and so animatedly and so angrily for 7 hours in the House and over 5 hours in the Senate. So just the substance of it is very significant advance forward. The differences from the original bill 5002 that he vetoed is that in that bill there would have been a mandate for towns to create specific numbers of units that would be allocated to them. This now allows for a planning process, but it mandates that towns engage in that planning process, and it also provides incentives for those who do in terms of more state grant programs. There's also a program in there that provides an increased percentage for the school construction grants for towns that participate. It also has the provisions in there for transit-oriented development, so the developing areas where the state has a transit facility, whether it be a bus or a train in that town, to allow for greater density.
Like we're doing at Union Station.
Yes, that's right. And
what about the provision that was going to allow, as of right, in a commercial zone for you to build a 2 to 9 unit apartment building? Did that get struck?
Well, no, it's still in there. There's still an expedited process for conversion of commercial buildings to residential. Actually allows the developer to bypass certain zoning requirements and
so what was left out besides
what was left out was besides the mandate
November
of units was also the change in the parking, because the original bill said that buildings that had 24 units or less would not be required to have parking. The compromise was 16 in the bill that passed.
That's not a big change.
No, it isn't. No.
What was interesting to me, Marty, was that after the Republican opposition...
Oh, and one other thing on the bill that I think is important too in the future is that it gives the State Department of Housing the capacity to be, in effect, a housing authority all over the state. That's also a biggie.
Because
it will provide another way to incentivize and promote affordable housing and work with developers who want to do that.
So When it was first vetoed, the idea was that he wanted to have consensus, and that's why he wanted to have a version everyone get behind. So you have now a bill that still does a lot, but not everything they did before. I'm not seeing the consensus. The Republicans are still running against it, right?
Oh yeah, the Republicans.
So
are
what was
absolutely against it.
gained politically?
Well, what was
by the
gained
governor?
politically by the governor, I think, was that he got some buy-in from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities.
Oh, okay.
That was a biggie for him, I think.
That is a biggie.
Yeah.
So Marty, is there anything else in the special session we didn't touch on?
No, well, the allowing for the hospital conversion was a big
Yeah.
one. We also had a provision in the in one of the bills that will allow for more investment in children's behavioral health and monitoring of that, and raising the age of insurance coverage from 21 to 26 for those with autism, and that's something we made some progress on.
What does that mean
ago.
on a parent's bill? On a parent's coverage?
Yep.
I missed that one.
But we'll also be able to do. A few years ago, we raised modestly the Medicaid reimbursements to providers who provide mental health services to children. So this will kind of provide additional evidence that will support in increasing that again, because what we're seeing so often is that children are often not able to get access to mental health services outside of the school. So if the kid has a problem that needs more than what the school counseling can provide, because so many providers don't take Medicaid, families have a great difficulty. So that's a real challenge for us to move on. And I think that was another provision, one of the bills that will help us move forward on that.
Todd Davies, thank you for listening to the show, writes in, how about let people keep more of their money and stay out of our lives? Is that something you could say about immigration? Immigration sweeps, people working at car washes?
Well, yeah, I know. Does he mean then that they should just not sweep people away and just let them live their lives?
Okay. So another thing's been in the news that wasn't part of the special sessions, the changes at PURA, the Public Utility Regulation Authority. We used to know it as DPUC,
Yes.
Public Utility Control. And there was this campaign by the utilities to get rid of the woman who ran the agency because she was kind of tough on them.
Yes.
They got rid of her, and then right away, United Illuminating got rate increases that were twice of what she had been suggesting. So our bills are all going up $10 or more a month. Is that a fair way to characterize it, or am I missing something from a distance?
No, it's kind of ironic. Is that one of the things the Republicans have been saying is that our rates are far too high, but yet at the same time they were doing the utilities bidding by trying to get rid of the chair of the commission, and most of the decisions that PURA made during her tenure were actually upheld by the courts when they were repealed by the utility. So they were screaming about the high rates, but they were opposing the person who was the most aggressive watchdog and trying to keep the rates down.
So what do we need to do? How should we be keeping rates down?
Well, one of the things I think we need to do is to monitor the new commissioners closely and make sure that they are aggressive in making the utilities justify everything that they're doing. One of the other things is to look at all of the additional charges that are put on the utility bills, whether it's appropriate to have all of them there or whether some of them should be funded separately through general appropriations. Some of the Republicans have been talking about that a little bit, but the problem for them is that they want to take them off the bills and then vote against them. So, but that's not a reasonable way to proceed either.
Wallingford has a publicly owned utility.
Yes.
It's a very conservative Republican town.
Yep.
Their rates are lower than ours, and the lights don't go out.
That's right.
So why are we having the rest of the state have private utilities that are making a profit and doing a bad job?
Well, that is part of. That's why I think that PURA really needs to be aggressive, because the utilities basically have a guaranteed monopoly market here, a guaranteed profit, and no competition basically, except for the couple of small towns that have their own. So that's why I think it's entirely appropriate to have PURA take an aggressive posture. I mean, we do have a separate office of the Office of Consumer, the Consumer Council on that as well to advocate for consumers in utility matters, but still, I think it's important to have. There's going to be now a huge turnover in the commission with all the new people that Governor Lamont has appointed, and I think we need to watch their performance very closely to make sure that they're being vigilant and doing what the public wants and making the utilities continue to be accountable.
What would have been the difference with the wind farm, and what's the status of that? So I was going to build a wind farm, I believe, was off of Bridgeport, and it was pretty late stages, and the Trump administration is moving to deny approval to let it go online. What's happening with that? What an impact would that make on our utility bills?
Well, that would help. Everything that we can do in terms of solar or wind power is something that contributes to the available power, and I think that we're still working to try to find a way that to move that forward. Plus, the one that the Trump administration mysteriously ended the wind turbine funding for that, and all of a sudden now that's been restored. Governor Lamont, I thought, had a very good line when he said, "We're waiting for the ransom note."
Well, it's interesting, his approach has been don't fight with the Trump administration, lay your head down low. Is that working? Is this an example of that working?
I don't know. I think it's an issue by issue thing. Obviously, some of the Democratic governors that, the ones that are thinking of running for president, I think are out there, fighting
like Pritzker
and Newsom and some others. But I think Lamont is taking the longer view on things. Yep.
In general, how is the Trump administration affecting the state and our legislature? How has your job changed in the last year and moving forward?
Well, I've never seen anything like this, in which all of a sudden we're dealing with a hostile federal government, cutting programs that we see as valuable. And we've never had this before. Even in other Republican administrations, there was certain baseline of cooperation that you could count on, even back with Reagan. I came into the legislature just as Reagan came into the presidency. So with Reagan and the two Bushes, there was always a certain threshold of reasonableness about how the government should work. And all of a sudden, there's no bottom to the bottom right now. And that's the worry, is that Trump will just throw a hand grenade every day. It was sort of like we're holding our breath every day to see what happens. It's like one of my favorite lines in Shakespeare's King Lear, where Edgar is roaming in the woods, having been betrayed by his brother Edmund, dispossessed. He's a broken man. He's out there in rags, and he thinks that nothing worse can happen to him until he sees his father coming along in the same condition as he is, except also having his eyes having been put out also by Edmund. And at that point, Edgar says, "The worst is not yet, as long as we can say this is the worst." So as long as you're conscious, things can get worse. Probably one of the most grim lines in Shakespeare, but it's certainly...
Well, how are you feeling about it in terms of, as a legislator, as a person who's worked your whole life to try to move your city and your state forward? How do you see the next year and next 3 years?
Well, I see it as continuing to be a challenge, but I think we are a state that actually has more resources to deal with what the federal government is inflicting upon us than many other states, and that's because of the disciplined savings since 2017. There aren't that many states that have a budget reserve fund as large as ours, and I define what we're facing right now as truly a rainy day. There are other kinds of rainy day other than just having an economic recession.
Do you think we'll get a stock market crash, or are people just too literal in their historical parallels?
I don't know about that. I mean, it depends. I mean, Trump is so volatile on the issue of tariffs. And
then the AI, all that investment that's going to come down to earth. And
exactly.
The returns have not been high on the.
It is. So looking back, Governor Lamont's great grandfather was a major financial player, was a senior advisor to J.P. Morgan, actually ran J.P. Morgan, and he was an advisor to President Wilson and also later to President Hoover. And he was one of the strongest advisors to Hoover to veto the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Told him that it would only make the Depression worse. And Hoover didn't listen to him. And it did make the Depression worse.
That's kind of interesting. So when you watched last week, first of all, how did you think the shutdown went? Some people say the Democrats did not gain much. A lot of people were hurt because of it. Other people say that you had to make the point about not just going along with Trump administration policies when they don't honor them anyway with decision spending. How did you feel it played out?
I think it was necessary for them to do, even though it was very painful. It was sort of like there was a really good column, I think, an analysis of it by Ezra Klein that talked about.
Well, he thought they should never have compromised to open a government again.
He thought they made a mistake in the first one when they didn't,
right.
A few months ago when Schumer went along and didn't do the shutdown. But I think one of his points was particularly good. He said the problem is that the Republicans are willing to inflict more pain than the Democrats, in some cases, are willing to accept.
So what do you do with that?
Well, I think but I still think the fact that the municipal elections went so well last week did point out, and I think the country made the correct judgment, that it really was the Republicans responsible for the shutdown because of the fact that they wanted to rob people of health insurance.
Well,
even though it was painful on the SNAP side.
I couldn't understand if Martin Looney, as state senator, you negotiate with governors. If you were in the U.S. Senate, you're negotiating with a president who was repeatedly this year said we're not going to honor spending, whether it's foreign aid programs, whether it's social, public service or programs, whether it's human services. They're saying we don't have to follow the constitutional mandate that Congress sets spending. So how do you negotiate? Like if he says, okay, we make a deal and we're going to increase the subsidies, then the next day he says he can't. He won't.
I don't see how you can, because he's not operating under any framework of rules that people can count on. My great worry, Paul, is that the whole tradition of the Supreme Court having the capacity to overturn acts of Congress is unconstitutional. That's not in the Constitution. It's based upon the case Marbury versus Madison in 1803.
The Midnight Judges.
Yeah, Chief Justice John Marshall, and he ruled against something Jefferson wanted, but Jefferson acquiesced in that and went forward. And the only one to ever go against that was Andrew Jackson once, where I think in the case of Native American removal, again, Marshall was still in Supreme Court Chief Justice 30 years later, and Jackson said, John Marshall has made his decision, let him enforce it. But no other president's done that. But my worry is that Trump won't even consider himself bound by a U.S. Supreme Court decision. And a further worry of that is that he may already have told them that if you want to maintain the fig leaf of your authority, don't rule against me. So I think that's a big worry out there.
So one critique some people are giving the Democratic Party now is by focusing so much on the Epstein files, you're picking another fight you're not going to win with Trump when there are all these fights you can win on health care and the economy. Do you think those critics are right that that's a mistake to get distracted in the way they did with some of these like legal cases against Trump that were oversold?
Well, I think the benefit of the Epstein case that it seems to have some Republicans riled up too, not just Democrats. And I think there's a benefit to have a bipartisan approach on that, because there hasn't been bipartisanship on anything else.
Okay. And then finally, the Democratic Party has been debating the outcome of the most recent elections, where you had moderate Republicans win governor races in Virginia and New Jersey.
Democrats.
Democrats. Building on votes that have been lost to Trump beforehand, especially Latino areas. But then you have Democratic Socialists were in New York. First of all, is that the right way to frame it about what the message was? Is this fight going on now? Do you get more moderate, or do you agree with Chris Murphy that you go more fighting on economic populist issues? Or is that not the right way to frame the discussion?
I think we do need to focus economic populist issues, but at the same time, we have to make sure we're doing it in a way that connects with people, and that they believe us, and that they believe our values are genuine. We had Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky spoke at our Democratic Party dinner on Saturday night, and he's just a phenomenon that he is elected in a state that went for Trump by 30 points. And what he said was that he maybe, the name is a brand, because his father was a popular Democratic governor before him. But when he was asked about, how do you do this? And he said, well, I'm a person of faith, and I operate out of faith and values. But my faith and values, based upon love thy neighbor, leads me to support social services and things that I draw different conclusions from my faith than some of my co-religionists do who are on the right. But it does give him a sort of values-based thing. And he said he's had people all the time who come up to him and say that, I don't agree with you on things, but I believe you're a man of integrity. So I think we have to somehow connect with a values base, but at the same time, really, really push on economic populism. I know that many people are turned off by the so-called Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party, and that is something that I think has really hamstrung our federal the federal wing of our party for a long time.
Since are you following the Jersey City mayoral race?
Was that?
Have you been following the Jersey?
No, I haven't. No.
Former Governor McGreevey. Remember, he resigned in disgrace. He just came second in a field of 7 candidates. He's in a runoff with a progressive,
really,
a fellow Democrat in there. It's a city of 300,000 people and growing.
Because he started as mayor before he was governor.
Right, of Woodbridge, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's getting all that money from the Wall Street wing and the Trump donors, even though he's a Democrat. It'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out next week.
Yeah.
So looking ahead to next year, you were doing some interesting math for me before we came on the air. So next year there's going to be an election where Democrats are going to run against Trump. And the question is that smart or not smart, right? So in 2016, Trump was president. 2018, we had a midterm election where people lined up for hours, which doesn't usually happen in a non-presidential year, to vote because they wanted to vote against Trump in Connecticut. And you guys made huge gains. You went from a Senate that was 18-18, Democrat, Republican, to 21-15.
22-14.
22-14.
Yeah.
So that was a huge change, and you've since built on to suit majority 25-11.
Right, and we've added one more seat every election since then. We went to 23 in 2020, 24 and 22 and 25 in 2024.
So is the playbook again next year in the midterm election to run against Trump, and you're hoping to have similar gains?
Well, at least in part, but also I think every senator, every candidate for the legislature has to run on issues that resonate in his or her own district too. You can't just talk about the national scene. You've got to convince people that you're looking to represent that district and you understand that district and its needs and priorities. You can't just say I'm a federal surrogate. Yeah.
And are you planning to run again?
At this point, I'm going to open my campaign committee next week, as I usually do, just usually in the time period between the municipal elections and Thanksgiving. So I plan to file next week.
And what are you seeing in the governor's race? So Ned Lamont's running again. He has a primary challenge, well, not a primary challenge, but he's at least a convention challenge from Josh Elliott from the left for the Democratic nomination. And then he has two youngish, I guess Aaron Stewart's not young anymore, but not old, So she's been around a little longer, but Ryan Fazio and Aaron Stewart are running as Republicans. How are you looking at that field? Are the Republicans doomed because of being an anti-Trump vote in Connecticut, or is there enough growing dissatisfaction? We saw a growing Trump vote in Connecticut, even though we didn't see it in the municipal elections the most recent elections were a sweep for Democrats. The year before that, we saw a movement toward Trump. How are you assessing that when you look at the field of 20?
Well, I think that 26 should be a good Democratic year. Parallel to what 2018 was in terms of higher turnout, just as 25 kind of followed the pattern of 17. I hope 26 will follow the pattern of 18. I think from what I've heard also from some of my Republican sources that Senator Fazio and Mayor Stewart are already looking at a two-campaign strategy, hoping that they will come close enough if Governor Lamont is the candidate that they won't be embarrassed by being crushed and will still be viable enough to run in 4 years, sort of what happened with Stefanowski and Foley.
Oh.
And from what I'm hearing, that the loser of those two is hoping that that whoever gets the nomination gets crushed so badly that they're not viable to run again in 4 years.
That's his thing, but Fazio still have a platform as a rising legislator, whereas Stewart's kind of out of office now, right?
That's right. So she was her term ended last week when the new mayor was sworn in.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And all right, and how about in New Haven? We're going to start having 4-year mayoral terms. Do you see? Oh, but I forgot to ask you: are you supporting Ned Lamont for re-election?
Paul, you're trying to deprive me of the ritual and the tradition of making an announcement, but
okay, that's okay.
But obviously at some point there will be one.
Okay, yeah. No, I didn't know if you stepped in. What about in this?
And I think also that Governor Lamont is clearly our strongest general election candidate, and I think one of the other factors that favors him this year is the fact that that people want to make sure that you when we're under siege from Trump that you can't take a risk of a Democratic governorship that you currently have.
And that's interesting because on policy, you've been part of the Democratic wing that's been frustrated with Lamont on a number of issues like personal income tax.
On some, yes, and I think Josh Elliott is providing a very valuable service in highlighting some of the progressive tax issues in particular. But as you said, I think that's really the main purpose of his campaign. He's a rising, younger star and younger leader in our party, and I think at some point he will be a candidate for some statewide office in the future. And he's also a very good networker, coalition builder, brings people from various advocacy groups together. He's got great skill, and I think he has a very bright future. But I think the concern for this year, he has said that he is running for the purpose of raising those issues, and that he would not carry his campaign beyond the convention if he's not the convention endorsed candidate.
I found that really interesting. Yeah. So, and then back home in Fairhaven, where you grew up, you continue to represent them. There's now a Martin and Ellen Looney lobby at the Fairhaven Health Center, which you helped them build and expand. How does that feel?
That feels I'm enormously moved by that. I just feel so great about that. And Dr. Lagarde called me, and she actually told me that it was John DeStefano who initially proposed that as a member of the board. Yeah. So, but that's great. To
I always wonder that when you're
in
politics in legislating and you day-to-day kind of frustrating meetings, trying to move the ball ahead. It took you a lot of years, with the death penalty and progressive income tax. What are the kind of things that sometimes make you feel it's worth it, or that you can look at and say we came a distance? I mean, Fairhaven Health Center has really grown a lot since you've been in office.
Oh, absolutely right. They began with a part-time operation, at one of the Fairhaven schools, and then they bought their first building, which was the former funeral home on Grand Avenue, and then expanded beyond that, and now they go all the way with the new building all the way to the corner of James Street. So a much bigger facility. They serve thousand, I think it's 37,000 individual patients a year, and in this world of healthcare, they along with the Cornell Scott Center, they are a bedrock of healthcare in New Haven.
It's kind of interesting to me, like all the things that didn't go right with the Great Society and urban renewal. We were early there with Fairhaven Health and Cornell Scott on the Community Health Center. I think that was really one of the successes.
That's absolutely right.
Of urban renewal in model cities and the Great Society.
And they both opened in the late 60s, early 70s. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, Martin Looney, I hope you get to visit that hall often, that lobby, as a guest, not as a patient.
Thank you, Paul.
And thank you so much for coming on air. I always love when you come on, you fill us in on what's happening in Hartford, because it matters so much to what happens in New Haven.
Great to be with you, Paul.
Okay. And thanks, Harry Droz, for working the controls. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all week long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.